So, Dead Space. Does it need a remake? See, this has been a trend that I have seen circulating around the internet, and it seems like an interesting topic, so I thought I would give my thoughts on the matter, as most creators seem to think that the only way a game gets a remake is as if the game had been made like 50 years ago, and only then is it acceptable to remake a classic or masterpiece such as, well, Dead Space. In most of these videos that ask the question of, does Dead Space require or need a remake? They tend to mainly review the first game, which is something that I will not be doing. Rather, I will just be going over what the game did well and the areas where it fared rather poorly. So let's begin. The first point that we should bring up is the fantastic usage of audio and lighting to set the mood and to build the world around the player. The lighting in some parts of the game is managed very well. However, in other areas, the lighting comes across as being a bit too bright. And when playing through the game on multiple playthroughs, I never felt that the ship had been running low on power and that it had been sabotaged from within, like an inside job. Which is what had been happening with some of the systems designed to keep the ship's life support and functions intact. But the Ishimura is supposed to have gone dark. Even in the first few moments of the introduction, Kendra asks where the running lights are, hinting that power is low on board the ship. But in multiple locations, the lights seem to be either functioning as they should be, or are so bright it's like the frickin' Messiah has returned. Sorry, Noodle. Surely if the ship is low on power through chapters 1 to 4, then these bright areas shouldn't be like this, rather they should be all dark. The lighting in contrast to the plot should be glitching out. It shouldn't be functioning as normally as it does in the game. Take chapter 3 for an example. When you go to the centrifuge, the entire room is lit so bright that you forget that you are on board a ship that has hardly any power left. Surely these locations should have been left in the dark, and after reigniting the engines, then these locations would be lit more brightly, or at least illuminated by some spotlights that are still remaining in the room. But rather, when you return to chapter 2, or to the medical deck, the main area and imaging diagnostics have hardly any lighting, rather there are candles spread all over the place. Why are they here after the engines have been fixed? Why not have them in chapter 2 rather than 5? Surely that would have been showing a progression through the game. Areas that had earlier been enveloped by darkness are now brightly or dimly lit, allowing for us to see what we couldn't see previously. But I guess we can just say for atmospheric purposes, even when it doesn't make that much sense in the plot or the chronology of the events taking place. However, in other areas, the lighting does work very well, with the spotlights in chapter 2 and other locations being dimly lit with flickering lights, making the player wonder what had transpired before they had arrived, which sets the tone perfectly. I just wish they had done this a bit more in chapters 1 to 4, so that we could have gained more of a progression with these background elements. Moving away from the lighting of the game, let's move to the audio side of things, which has been done very well too. With the hydraulic sounds of doors opening and closing, the clanging of machinery within the walls that can be heard nearby, and from a distance all the way to a pipe falling over in the following or previously explored areas of the level. It really sets that tone of how alone the player truly is when exploring the interior of the Ishimura. Even when the player moves into a vacuum, you can hear all of the air rushing out of the room while it decompresses, and once you are moving through said vacuum, you can barely hear a thing, which adds to the immersion of the player's surroundings. Hence why the game had gained so many awards for this aspect. There isn't anything I can fault the developers for on this point. The ambience only adds to the immersion when hearing necromorphs crawling around in the vents, chasing new leads on potential new victims to add to their many numbers, and that of when the hunter is chasing after you. You can hear him in the vents, and even that growl he makes when he is preparing for a battle with you had been executed very well. The necromorph sounds may not be as intimidating as they had been expected to have been, but the sounds they make the necromorphs sound real, with regurgitated growls and choking noises, making them sound as if they had been dead prior to the transformation. This is a reanimated corpse after all, and the sounds they develop really do set that tone really well, and each one is unique from the others, so when a slasher begins its attacking run, it's going to sound different from a leaper's charge or a lurker's idle sounds. First things first, the graphics aren't exactly what many had put them up to be. Sure enough, the game had a lot of attention to detail within the art side of things, but to say that they hold up to this day is it's a bit of an overstatement. Especially when you look closely at the environments, you can see blurry details on the walls, posters, and even the interfaces. Characters such as Kendra and Hammond possess animation glitches and bugs that really show the age of the game, but more on this later. The only set of graphics that don't look that blurred when on close inspection would be Isaac's suit, which has aged very well, still looking as real as ever, which further grounds the world around the player. The locations, however, are all specific to which area of the ship that you are located in, which actually adds more depth to the experience, with the engineering deck looking the most industrial, to the bridge that looks reminiscent of a high-profile area where the higher-class personnel would operate, and the crew deck even has access to space basketball, a cinema, and even restaurants. And there are plenty more where those came from. All of this helps to further pull the player into the world, as you can actually imagine that these people would have been living on board this ship, similar to how workers live on board a cruise ship, with all kinds of facilities on board, you know, minus the medical deck. The gameplay is indeed a very fun time to be had. Even though it had been intended to be a survival horror, the action-orientated style of dismembering limbs from your foes really shines through the flaws of the game has on display, making you forget these issues and helps the player to blast through hours of their free time. The game's weapons are too incorporated into this style of immersion, with weapons such as fan favorite the plasma cutter and the line gun, the pulse rifle, and so many others that can all be unlocked and purchased from the many stores. The weapons also possess alternate firing modes, which allows for players to customize their loadouts to suit their play style. The real gem of the gameplay, however, is the rig and inventory system. See, in most games, the health bar and the vital information is presented to the player in the corner of the screen, being known as the HUD system. However, in Dead Space, the developers wanted to provide players with an immersive experience, so they put the health bar and the stasis on the back of the character, plus the inventory at this time would normally be accessible through pausing the game, taking the player out of the world around them and into another menu. However, in Dead Space, the map, journal, logs, and inventory are all accessible in the rig system, meaning that everything around the player still happens in real time. So if you are surrounded by enemies, or in this case necromorphs, they can still attack you or pursue the player even when they bring up the inventory. However, there is a tool to allow the player some breathing space, and that is the stasis module that allows Isaac to shoot out a burst of energy that slows enemies and objects down, allowing the player to escape certain situations quicker and at the cost of less health. The player can also use objects to take down enemies with the use of the Kinesis module that allows players to pick up boxes, crates, fan blades, and so many other objects that they can throw at these enemies for more creative gameplay, adding more variety to the gameplay. The Kinesis module can also be used to grab items that are too far away to normally be picked up, or items that are located in areas that are inaccessible with the pre-established routes. Now that we have gone over the audio, lighting, gameplay, graphics, and gameplay, let's go over the story and characters of Dead Space. This part will have spoilers for Dead Space, so skip to the following chapter if you wish to remain pure of the story and conclusion. The characters in the first 4 chapters of the game seem distanced from one another, with conflict being shown to the player. While playing through the game, I didn't see any hints as to why Kendra was to be so aggressive towards Hammond, constantly going off on him, even after executing a risky maneuver to save their lives. Protecting her from the necromorphs and building a makeshift plan, she continues to act aggressively. Many would say that this is stress taking place, but spoiler alert, Kendra already knew of the necromorph outbreak, and she takes pleasure in revealing this at the end of chapter 11. So she must have taken the time on the journey to prepare herself for the horrors within the ship. Yes, she would still be stressed, but not as de-stressed as someone who had no preparation. Which brings us to Hammond, being the voice of reason, with him only going off on Kendra when she attacks him first. Otherwise, he never raises his tone to match hers. Hammond mainly keeps his cool all the way to his untimely death at the end of the game. He acts how a leader would act. Many would say that it was reckless to even attempt to finish the mission. However, I argue that Hammond wasn't aware of the full scale of the infestation in the first chapter. However, his decision to turn tail and run away comes in a bit late into the game, as we can guess by chapter 3 that the entire ship's personnel had been turned into necromorphs, save for a few. In the beginning chapters of the game, there are a few mentions of Nicole. However, after chapter 2, the characters never reference her again, until the end of chapter 12, which is a bit weird. The sightings of Nicole has also been criticized in the past, and I actually agree that Nicole popping up when the plot requires her to is again weird and defeats the purpose of these sightings. We as the player are supposed to think that she has been alive the whole time in order for the plot twist at the end of the game to work as effectively as it can. Unfortunately, it falls short of what could have been. The twist at the end could have been like Black Ops, where the player was left to believe that Rezanov had been alive the whole time, but it would soon be revealed that the times you saw him after the second mission had all been in Mason's head, justifying all of the times people had flat out ignored his dialogue, or even questioned Mason's state of mind. The same could have been done here with Nicole showing up, with the characters constantly asking Isaac if he was alright, with them pulling facial expressions that show their inner confusion. However, these hallucinations you see of Nicole and other characters never get used in the plot twist. Little snippets of flashes of memories from previous chapters could have been more effective here. The story of the game seems to rely on the player having read the comics of Dead Space and watching the Downfall film, creating a bit of a lackluster story. However, the game's story also falls underneath the trope of finding journal entries or logs in order to solve the mystery of what happened prior to your arrival. The game's themes seem to take inspiration from other horror films and games prior to its development, such as Resident Evil, Alien, The Thing, and Event Horizon. Now we get to what inspired me to make this video, and that would be when observing other creators' points and arguments, they never bring up the issues that plague the gameplay, and something that had been left for the community to make a playthrough enjoyable. In this chapter, we will be talking about the bugs, glitches, and other aspects that takes the player right out of the experience. Say an enemy is running towards you. Uh-oh, you have no ammo. And look, you're on low health, one hit away from being booted back to the previous checkpoint. But you have one more stasis shot, so you quickly pull out your weapon and you shoot your shot very quickly. But the stasis can either have one of 4 different effects, depending on how quick you are. 1. You hit the necromorph and they stop right in their tracks, allowing for you to reload and put that puppy down. 2. The stasis burst flops to the ground and does absolutely nothing to the necromorph, issuing a death to you, sending you back to the previous checkpoint. 3. The stasis acts like an RPG in a Call of Duty game, flying in any direction other than the direction you fired at. Well, I guess it could have been worse. It could have given you the old Dark Souls treatment. You died. Yeah, no shit. 4. The stasis can fly through the hitbox of the necromorph and it continues until hitting a wall behind it and you've been skewered by this point. The kinesis, on the other hand, can have the 4th effect, flying through objects, and sometimes it doesn't even work unless you are standing in a certain spot or angle. Now, this point is a rarity, but it can still happen in a normal playthrough. Necromorph textures morphing and filling the entire room, which at times can be more terrifying than the actual game's scares. Other times there will be certain boxes or crates that cannot be destroyed by a curved stomp, forcing the player to waste ammunition to see what's inside the box. The PC port is another interesting tale that shows how much Visceral Games really disliked the PC version, as it came with a terrible mouse support for the game, forcing players to aim in a very slow manner unless they added a community fix known as the mouse fix. However, if you want to play the game under the creepypasta difficulty, just play the game with VSync being turned off, as you will be presented with bodies, objects being possessed by the marker itself, with them twitching, moving on their own, and sometimes even spazzing out. Certain areas won't load properly, and on top of that, certain enemies may just fail to spawn in, soft-locking you in areas such as the freezing hunter part of the game in Chapter 5, as you cannot progress unless he spawns in. It's interesting how no one talks about these issues in their videos. Maybe because if they didn't sweep these things underneath the rug, it would destroy their own argument. And I'm afraid these are only the tip of the iceberg. Just look up pulse boosting, then you will see how truly broken the game is. Even listing all of the issues and things that wasn't very well executed in Dead Space, I still think the game is a good one. But I definitely would not call it a masterpiece. There are still improvements to be made, and to be honest, Dead Space is my favorite game of the entire franchise, and I still class it as number 1 on my list. So does it need a remake? No, not really. But does any game really need a remake? Honestly? With games that are awfully designed, I could see a counter-argument being made that the game does need one. But with Dead Space, I can see the game holds a lot of potential to be terrifying, or quote-unquote a masterpiece. And I feel that Dead Space doesn't require a remake, but it does deserve a remake to expand on the experience we all fell in love with all those years ago, and to improve on what came before, just like the previous team had accomplished back in 2008. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed, then hit the video with a like rating. Comment what your take is on this down below, and I look forward to hearing from you. Sign up to join the British Alliance today by subscribing and ringing in the notification bell so you are always notified for more content like this when it goes up. A special thank you to all of my channel members for the extra mile you go for this channel. I really appreciate you, and if you would like to become a member today to gain exclusive rewards, then hit that join button today and see which of the tiers takes your fancy, and I will see all of you among the cosmos, and be sure to have a good one.